Alright, welcome biology students to your first set of notes of the entire year. We're into Unit 1, Section 1. We're going to talk about the scientific method. In class we talked about who scientist is, and we did that little activity. Talked about, found out that we are actually all scientists because we use the scientific method in our everyday lives. So we're going to go through these notes. I'm not going to be on the screen the whole time. Hi world. Instead, I'm going to turn this off so we can focus on the PowerPoint slides, but then as we go, make sure you're filling in your notes page. If you haven't downloaded this from mrkubuske.wordpress.com to Notability, now is a good time to do that. All of our notes are going to have this little, if I look on the side here, this little information on the side. See, it says notes, and it's got little music notes on it. Get it? That's a way for us to go back and find notes later on as we go. So I'm actually going to close out and say goodbye. See ya. Okay, and let's go through the scientific method. It says science allows us to understand the world around us, but science is always changing. That's an important idea. Okay, science cannot answer all questions. Some are untestable. So instead of creating scientific facts, we create something called a scientific theory, which we'll talk about here in a second. Okay, so the scientific method. What are the steps of the scientific method? Again, you're going to fill in the steps as we go. These pretty much be the only time we do notes like this. The rest of the time, we're going to do something called Cornell notes. Okay. So, step one, we have a problem. What is your problem? No, that's not what I meant to say. Just kidding. But what are we trying to solve? Like, what's the purpose of what we're doing here? Like, a good example that I like to use is I have a little puppy. Her name's Cassidy. We just got her a couple weeks ago, my wife and I, and she keeps getting sick. Okay, so that's a problem. Obviously, she keeps throwing up all over the place. So we need to do something about that problem. So anytime I have a problem, I'm going to try to find ways to solve the problem or find out what is causing the problem, and then create a solution to the problem after that. You use this all the time. Like even when you're opening your locker and have trouble opening the lock, you think, okay, well, why didn't it open this time? Did I do something wrong? Is there something wrong with the lock? Am I at the right locker? Like you go through the steps in your head without even realizing it. So let's talk about what those steps are. So again, the problem, what do you want to find out? How does it relate to that topic? Like what you're covering? Is what you're working on actually testable? Like, can I go back and I reproduce it, or is it just like something I think about? Can I feel it? Is it? Can I sense it? Can I make observations about it? So again, we're going to use the example. My dog keeps getting sick. So let's write a hypothesis. Okay, a hypothesis. You'll hear all the time people say, "Oh, it's an educated guess." Well, it's not really a guess. It's a prediction that you think will happen based on fact, like research that you have done. Okay, and it should always be written as an if-then sentence. Okay, when you go on and take statistics classes and things like that, you'll find out about a null hypothesis. Okay, but for this one, we're just going to work on if-then sentences. Okay, so if my dog eats my cheap dog food that I keep buying him because I can't afford the expensive stuff because I'm just a teacher, okay, then he gets sick. Well, that's my hypothesis, even if it's not a formal one. Like it doesn't take a rocket science to come up with that hypothesis. It's just something I think of in my head. Well, if this happens, then that happens. So that's what a hypothesis has to be. It has to be an if-then statement. Okay. So what's the procedure then? Like, how are we going to test that hypothesis? Well, I know that my dog keeps getting sick. I think it's because of the dog food. Well, how am I going to prove that? What steps are we going to follow? And it's important that we do it in steps because they have to be reproducible. I can't just say, oh, this is what I did and that's what I got. No, 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 no. It doesn't work like that. Anybody could say that. I need you to show me how you did it, tell me the steps, and I need to be able, or someone else needs to be able to go back and reproduce your results. Otherwise, it's not true. It's not a scientific fact or a scientific theory. Okay? So what are the steps you're going to follow? You'll use 1, 2, 3, like literally just give it a 1, a 2, a 3, and you always want to start with a verb, something that you do. Run this, or, write this, put this there. So you're always going to start with a verb. Use clear instructions. Remember, think back to our Lego activity that we did. Have a control group and a variable group so your results are reliable. A control group and a variable group. We're going to talk about that on, I believe, the next slide. Okay, let's go back actually. The control group is the group that you don't add anything to. It's like just if I wanted to know if soda made plants grow better, well, obviously I would start with water because I know what happens when I give plants water. I know what rate they grow at. Okay, so the control group is the one that you don't add any extra variables to. The variable group, obviously, and you can have more than one, is the one that that's the one you're really trying to test. That's the one you're trying to find out. Okay. You need to address all safety issues in your procedure. You need to either explain what the safety issues are or try to combat them, try to come up with ways around them. Okay? So my example for my procedure is I'm going to give my dog the same dog food this week and then the expensive dog food next week and see how often he gets sick in those 2 weeks. Okay? That's going to be my procedure. Now again, if we're working in a lab, it needs to be more a little scientific than that. It needs to be bullet points and whatnot. So let's talk about our variables. Okay, they are part of our procedure. They're a part of our test. So we need to know what they are. We have our IV and the DV, and it's important to think of them with those letters, IV and DV. The independent variable, the IV, is the one that the experimenter changes. I control the independent variable. I control the IV. Get it? I independent. Okay? So for my example with my dog, the dog food that I am giving to my dog, that's the independent variable because I control what dog food he gets. Okay? I have that kind of control. The dependent variable then is the one that I have no control over. It's actually the one that I'm going to observe and the one that I'm going to make recordings about. So it depends on the test. It depends on what will happen. I don't know what the dependent variable what the result will be. It's all dependent on the test, and that's where the name comes from. So what changes are going to be observed? What's going to happen because I give my dog this different dog food? So my dependent variable here will be how many times the dog gets sick. I cannot control how many times the dog gets sick. The dog food I give him controls that. Yay, dog food. Okay. The control group, again, that's the standard. Okay, that's the one that we always know what will happen. Example, giving him the same dog food over the entire week. That could be the control for my experiment. Control groups, a lot of times will be given something called a placebo, and placebos are fake pills. They're not real. They're like sugar pills, but people might think that they are something else. And we'll talk about placebos more in class. Hopefully I'll give you a good example of that. The variable then, the experimental group, okay, that's the group that you're actually changing what happens to, okay? Like you may say that if I give you this glass of awesome juice, it makes you awesome. So I take 25 group people and I give them water and I give 25 people this awesome juice. Well, which one of those is the control group? Well, the control group is the water group because I know what happens when I give people water. They don't become any more awesome. But when I give people the awesome juice, they might actually become awesome. I don't know. So that's the variable group. That's the one I'm testing. Okay, and the variable again is whatever's changed. Same as in math class. Okay. Step 4, data, whatever you want to pronounce it as, okay? That's the information you gather during the experiment, and there's 2 types. There's quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative sounds like the word quantity. Quantities are numbers. So this is anything that you can express as a number. Quantitative data is very important in the scientific community. You always want to have numbers to back up your results. Qualitative data is descriptive, okay? Quantitative data might be the tree is 70 meters tall. The qualitative data would be the tree is tall. It's just a description, okay? 70 meters, that's a freaking tall tree. Oh my gosh. Okay, so for mine, if the dog got sick 3 times, that would be quantitative. But if I said, oh, that dog's getting better, that's qualitative. Now, analysis. This is based on the data that I received. Okay, I'm going to make some guesses and I'm going to do something with that data. Okay, I'm actually probably going to put it into a table, a graph, or a chart so I can better understand what I'm looking at. That is the analysis. That's when I actually take the data and do something with it. Okay, and I need enough in my analysis. I need enough data to prove my observation. Okay, so when I make a graph, and this is important too, my independent variable, remember that's the one that I control, goes on the bottom, and my dependent variable will go on the left. Okay, so for my example, the 2 different types of dog food, those would be bar graphs. Okay, and then how many times the dog gets sick would go on the left because that's my dependent variable. Okay, so there's my healthy dog. He must feel better. Okay, what happened? That's my conclusion. Did the results support or reject my hypothesis? That's what I should always mention first in my conclusion. I should always write about my hypothesis. Was it right? Was it wrong? I need to summarize what happened since it was proven or disproven in my experiment. Okay, so a good example would be the cheap dog food made my dog sick 5 times. The expensive dog food only made him sick once. Therefore, the cheap dog food makes my dog sick more often than the expensive dog food. So my hypothesis was correct. I might want to mention that. I should have probably done that. Now, anybody notice anything that's a little off-putting about this conclusion? Okay, well, why did my dog still get sick with the expensive dog food? What happened? Like, there must be something now wrong with his insides if he's still getting sick even with the really expensive dog food. So that is a question for the future. That's something I might go further with. Okay, a lot of times, like if you're going to do a scientific experiment, really you end up doing multiple experiments because the one either did or didn't work. Same thing like when my locker gets stuck. I may retry to put my combination in slower. That doesn't work. Now I try something else. Well, it must be jammed, so I hit it or something, and now I'm going to try my combination. So a question for the future might just be like, what's your next step? Where do you go from here? Okay. You might also want to look at the fact, were there any errors in your test? What would you do differently? And are the results reliable? Like, are you sure that this makes sense, or was there an error that you might not have accounted for? Was there a different variable in there affecting it? Okay. And then lastly, what is a theory? A theory, okay, is based on your conclusion. If you can replicate your conclusion and results over and over and over again, then it becomes a scientific theory because you have a pretty good idea of why things are happening. Okay, it becomes a fact later on. We'll talk more about that later when we get into evolution. Okay, so an example, my dog gets sick when he eats cheap dog food. Not only was that my hypothesis in the beginning, it is now my theory. Okay, I have been able to prove my theory to be true. Okay, real quickly, there was some vocabulary in there that you gotta make sure that you paid attention to. The IV, independent variable, dependent variable, control group, experimental group, quantitative and qualitative data, the analysis, and the theory. Okay, hope you learned something. Appreciate your time. If you have any questions, please email me at jkubuske@gocathedral.com. And please feel free to move on to the Big Pill Company activity, which is the next handout that we'll work on. Okay, have a great day.